He drew a simple diagram on a discarded napkin, pointed to the secondary loop, and the entire multi-billion-dollar infrastructure blinked back online. I watched him do it. We had the best engineers in the world sweating in that server room for 8 straight hours, failing. But when the janitor's son Leo touched that keyboard, he didn't just fix the crash. He accessed files we didn't even know existed. The bank's senior VP of security, Michael Chen, slumped into his chair, the emergency lights still casting long, unstable shadows across the trading floor. The system was running, but the crisis was just beginning. Ethan Hayes, CEO of Apex Global Bank, was not accustomed to silence. His morning ritual, usually a tightly choreographed sequence of market data analysis, secure video calls, and a precise 15-minute workout, had been violently derailed. Instead of the digital hum of billions being traded, there was only the low, nervous static of the emergency generators powering the penthouse suite. Ethan stood overlooking the city, his hands gripping the cool granite sill. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like a man holding a fraying thread of sanity. His public image was flawless, a visionary under 40 who had stabilized Apex Global after the last great financial scare, doubling its value in 7 years. He commanded authority with an economy of movement, his voice calibrated to convey unwavering control, even when the market was on fire. Now, the bank's central nervous system had been dead for 8 hours, and every minute was translating into catastrophic losses and an unraveling trust. His private line, the one only 3 people knew, was vibrating relentlessly. He ignored it. The world could wait for the fix. His fear was deeper than the loss of capital. Ethan's private office was an exercise in minimalist power, steel, glass, and unadorned space. Yet tucked away behind a digital frame displaying a rotating feed of successful financial models was one static photo. A blurred shot of a woman with fiercely bright eyes, taken years ago at a simple seaside pier. That photo was the anchor to the wound he carried. 6 years ago, when he was rising meteorically, she had walked away, unable to bear the relentless, all-consuming hunger of his ambition. He had chased the success he thought would make him worthy, only to find the height utterly cold and empty. The system's failure brought back the familiar cold panic, the feeling of losing something irreplaceable due to his own blind focus. He felt responsible for every failed algorithm, every frantic engineer, every panicked stakeholder, because he had built this machine, this vast, powerful yet fragile construct, to replace the human connections he had sacrificed. Michael Chen, the VP of security, burst into the room without knocking, an unprecedented breach of protocol. "Mr. Hayes, the system is back, but we need to talk about how it came back online. It wasn't our team." Ethan turned, his eyes narrowing, the fear replaced by sharp, dangerous curiosity. The quiet desperation in Chen's voice was more alarming than the crash itself. Ricardo Rico Perez moved through the cavernous marble halls of Apex Global like a shadow, a gray blur against the billion-dollar decor. He was the head night janitor, a role that demanded invisibility and stamina. His shift started at 10 p.m. and ended just as the first wave of executives arrived, meaning his life was structured around perpetual exhaustion and the smell of industrial-grade polish. Rico was 52, built strong from a life of physical labor, but the strain was visible in the permanent slump of his shoulders and the tired lines around his eyes. His salary barely covered the rent and the specialized tutoring his son needed. That son, Leo, was the reason Rico endured the graveyard shift. Leo was 12, quiet, and possessed a mind that worked in intricate, luminous patterns. While other boys played soccer, Leo disassembled old radios and coded simple games on a hand-me-down laptop. He didn't see walls, he saw systems. Rico, proud but frightened, guarded Leo's brilliance fiercely. He knew genius was fragile, easily crushed by lack of opportunity, or worse, exploited by the kind of power that Apex Global represented. Tonight, Rico was supposed to be cleaning the executive restrooms, but the emergency call-in had pulled him to the server room floor, where 8 hours of high-stakes panic had left a landscape of empty coffee cups and discarded blueprints. He was mopping the slick floor near the primary cooling unit when Leo arrived. Rico had been unable to secure childcare due to the sudden shift, a desperate measure that now meant Leo was sitting quietly in a corner, ostensibly doing homework, surrounded by millions of dollars of failing hardware. Leo was not doing homework. He was watching the engineers, his dark eyes absorbing the frantic gestures and the complex, frustrating code scrolling across multiple monitors. Rico had seen that look before, the one that suggested Leo was witnessing a conversation in a language only he understood. Suddenly the boy stood up, clutching a crumpled napkin he'd found. Rico tensed, ready to pull Leo back to enforce invisibility, but Leo moved past the barricade tape, directly toward the console where Michael Chen and the senior technical officers were arguing in hushed, desperate tones. Rico swallowed his warning. He knew with a certainty that chilled him that Leo hadn't just accidentally wandered in. He knew somehow what they were missing. Where are you watching this story from? Let me know in the comments. The fluorescent lights of the server room hummed with a manic, stressful intensity. Ethan Hayes, galvanized by Michael Chen's report, descended from the penthouse, moving through the bank like a predator sensing a weakness in the herd. He arrived just as the system fully stabilized, the relief of the technical team palpable, a wave of desperate exhalations and quiet cheers. But Ethan didn't join the celebration. His gaze was fixed on the center of the room, near the main terminal, where a small commotion was still settling. He saw Michael Chen talking intensely with a senior engineer, but beyond them, catching the harsh reflection of the blinking status lights, was a child. A boy, no older than 12, holding a stained napkin standing beside a man in a bank janitorial uniform. Rico was attempting to guide Leo away, his hand firm on the boy's shoulder, a silent plea for discretion in his tired eyes. The sight was jarring, a perfect representation of everything that was supposed to be kept separate in Apex Global. The powerful mechanisms of finance and the messy reality of human life. Ethan didn't recognize the janitor, but the boy's composure struck him. While seasoned engineers were collapsing from exhaustion, the child looked mildly bored, as if he had just solved a trivial puzzle. Ethan watched as Chen leaned down toward Leo, asking a question, and Leo responded by tapping rapidly on the keyboard. The simplicity of the interaction contradicted the gravity of the recovery. This wasn't professional troubleshooting. This was instinctive mastery. Rico, acutely aware of the CEO's imposing presence across the room, urged Leo to hurry. He felt the weight of Ethan's scrutiny, a cold, dissecting attention that promised trouble. He was terrified that Leo's accidental visibility would cost him his job, the one thing protecting their precarious stability. He pulled Leo toward the exit, his heart hammering against his ribs. Ethan didn't move to stop them. He watched them disappear down the service corridor, the father exhausted and frightened, the son quiet and luminous. He didn't connect this accidental encounter with the crash itself yet. He only registered the profound anomaly of the child's presence. But Chen's earlier words echoed in his mind. He accessed files we didn't even know existed. Ethan felt a strange pull, a recognition that the fragile mechanism he ran had not been saved by his structure, but by something outside his control. Something humble and entirely unexpected. Something was fundamentally misaligned in his world. 2 days after the crash, Apex Global was back to its frantic pace, but Rico was operating on heightened alert. He was used to noticing details, the location of a misplaced security card, the odd stain on a carpet. But now his observations were focused on Leo's behavior. The boy was unusually withdrawn. He wasn't coding or drawing. He was staring at the crumpled napkin, now smoothed out and tucked into his school backpack. The system crash had been officially blamed on a third-party software update, a narrative Ethan Hayes had forcefully stamped out across the global press. But Rico knew better. He had stood right behind Leo. He knew his son hadn't just fixed a glitch. Leo had bypassed layers of proprietary security protocols, using what looked like a basic knowledge of network flow. What troubled Rico wasn't the technical feat. It was the strange, momentary flash in Leo's eyes after the fix, a flash of worry, not triumph. Rico was cleaning Ethan Hayes' private conference room later that week, meticulously wiping the expansive glass table. He overheard 2 junior analysts discussing the recovery in the hallway. They mentioned an immediate internal investigation, focusing not on the cause of the failure, but on an unprecedented spike in data access that occurred after the fix, specifically linked to a secondary dormant server cluster. They dismissed it as residual activity, a system artifact. But Rico didn't dismiss it. He remembered the diagram Leo drew on the napkin. It wasn't a diagram of the bank's main server architecture. It was a simplified map of an auxiliary loop, one Rico had seen in a decommissioned area of the basement 3 months ago while emptying storage. A loop that should have been dark, unused, holding only archived data. Why would Leo's fix require accessing a dark server? Rico felt the fear curdling in his stomach. He was a janitor, an outsider. To speak up meant risking everything, exposing Leo's brilliance and potentially drawing the attention of people who treated systems like games and humans like obstacles. He tried to rationalize it away. Leo was smart, he was just being protective of his little secret. But the persistent anxiety remained, fueled by the memory of the sheer panic on the engineers' faces and the immediate aggressive cleanup of the narrative by the powerful CEO. Rico knew that deep within the flawless facade of Apex Global, something dark was being housed on a forgotten server, and Leo had accidentally shone a light on it. He didn't know what it was, but he knew the moment the bank realized what Leo had found, their lives would shatter. The pressure mounted over the next few days until the silence of the bank felt heavier than any noise. Rico knew he couldn't wait for someone else to notice the anomaly. Leo, sensing his father's worry, had become even quieter. Spending hours poring over technical documents, he checked out from the public library. Documents related to distributed ledgers and hidden shell corporations. The knowledge Leo possessed was becoming a physical burden on Rico. The tipping point arrived when Rico was in the staff break room late one night. He overheard Michael Chen, the VP of Security, speaking urgently into a secured phone line. Chen wasn't talking about the crash anymore. He was talking about damage control, about an unauthorized entry point that needed to be permanently closed, and a reference to the kid who saw too much. Rico froze, the mop bucket suddenly feeling like a lead weight. They were moving to neutralize the threat, and the threat was Leo. Rico didn't run. He made a terrible, terrifying choice. He realized that a direct confrontation would be suicide. Ethan Hayes and his security apparatus were too vast. He needed to plant the seed of doubt where it would be impossible to ignore, within the system itself. That night, instead of cleaning the executive floor, Rico detoured. He slipped into the dimly lit, rarely used records archiving room, the place where all digital and physical paper trails went to die. He pulled out the crumpled napkin Leo had used. Using his security access, which was typically only for environmental control and lighting, Rico accessed a neglected physical terminal, the only one in the bank still running an outdated, less monitored operating system. He didn't know how to code, but Leo had taught him the basic logic of a simple file transfer. With shaking hands, Rico uploaded a high-resolution photograph of Leo's hand-drawn diagram. He labeled the file cryptically Apex or Loop Anomaly ZO3A. He didn't send it to the public server. Instead, he forced the file into the personal secured sync folder of Ethan Hayes, bypassing the standard firewalls, but ensuring it would land directly on the CEO's primary non-shared device. It was a desperate gamble, a quiet shout in the colossal architecture of the bank. Rico backed away, wiping the terminal clean with a swiftness born of fear. He had just implicated himself, risked his job and possibly his freedom, but the image of the drawing, highlighting the dark loop server, was now sitting on the CEO's desktop, an impossible contradiction waiting to be opened. The game had just changed direction violently. Ethan Hayes walked into his office at 5:00 a.m., precisely when the sun was just beginning to slice through the city smog. He needed the pre-dawn silence to prepare for the inevitable fallout from the recent crash. He sat down at his sleek bespoke desk, and the secure tablet, which contained his most sensitive internal memos, synced automatically. A notification flagged an incoming file, an anomaly, because the file had bypassed standard network protocols. Ethan hesitated, his trained instinct smelling trouble. The file name, Apex Orcs Loop Anomaly ZO3AE, meant nothing, but the source pointed to an internal, lower-tier terminal. He clicked it open. The image that flooded his screen was a photograph of a napkin, stained with coffee residue, bearing a child's crude, yet geometrically precise, schematic. It wasn't technical jargon, it was a map, and etched clearly, circled in shaky pencil, was the address of the secondary dormant server cluster, the one Chen had mentioned in passing as being contaminated during the restart. Ethan felt a cold wave wash over him. He recognized the server cluster. He had signed the internal memo authorizing its decommissioning 3 years ago. It should be dark, silent, holding only historical inert data. Why was it the key to the system crash? And why was this diagram delivered by an anonymous, low-level upload? He zoomed in on the photo, recognizing the clumsy upload from the janitor's terminal. Then he connected the pieces, the child in the server room, the janitor who desperately pulled him away, and the impossible fix. He immediately called Chen, his voice dangerously low. "Michael, pull the logs on the auxiliary loop 3. Access level gamma. Do it in a closed environment. And tell no one." Chen's immediate, almost panicked refusal was the proof Ethan needed. "Sir, that data is sensitive. It's legacy. It won't help with the investigation." "Legacy or liability," Ethan countered, his control snapping. "The system was offline for 8 hours. The only thing that brought it back was a boy who pointed to that loop." "What is running on that server, Michael?" "Don't lie to me. I built this bank." The silence on the line stretched, brittle and accusatory. Ethan knew the truth instantly. Chen and others, leveraging the deep pockets of Apex Global, had been using the decommissioned, unmonitored server to run black box trading algorithms or worse. A massive, unauthorized system that could destabilize the legitimate bank if exposed. They hadn't wanted to fix the system crash. They had wanted to prevent the recovery from revealing their secret system. Ethan's stomach clenched. His reputation, his bank, his entire legacy was built on a foundation of ethical quicksand, maintained by the very people he trusted. The urgency was total. He wasn't just investigating a crash anymore. He was racing to dismantle a massive internal crime before the press, or worse, federal authorities, found the breadcrumb left by the janitor's son. The confrontation took place in the sterile environment of Ethan Hayes' executive conference room, under the harsh glare of the city lights. Ethan sat at the head of the polished table, flanked by his legal counsel, facing Michael Chen, whose composure was rapidly disintegrating. Rico, the janitor, was seated quietly by the door, summoned as an observer and, fundamentally, a witness. He looked terrified, clutching the worn baseball cap in his lap. Ethan projected the image of the napkin onto the massive screen. "This diagram, Michael, shows the secondary loop, the loop you told me was contaminated residue. Explain how a 12-year-old boy fixing my bank's network crash needed to physically access and then document this particular server structure." Chen tried to pivot, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's a coincidence, Ethan. The boy is bright. He probably just recognized some old code." "The file transfer was traced to a terminal in the archive room." Ethan cut him off, his voice a blade of pure, controlled anger. "A terminal only accessible to non-technical staff. Rico, tell us what Leo told you about that loop." Rico hesitated, glancing at Chen, then at the image of his son's drawing, his proof. The fear of losing his job warred with the primal need to protect Leo. He took a deep breath. "Leo didn't just fix the crash, Mr. Hayes. He told me the crash was a firewall designed to hide the other system. He said the system was consuming resources, running constantly, hiding from the network auditors." Chen stood up, slamming his hands on the table. "This is absurd. You're taking the paranoid fantasy of a child and a disgruntled employee over 7 years of loyalty, Ethan." Ethan stood slowly, the movement forcing Chen to back down. "I checked the access logs, Michael. The auxiliary loop was running a sophisticated, unregistered algorithmic trading shell. It diverted billions in ghost trades, completely off the books, using Apex infrastructure as a shield. It was not legacy data. It was high-level fraud." Ethan walked around the table until he was standing directly over Chen. "When the bank crashed, your private shell system, dependent on the main system's power, became vulnerable. The fix Leo performed didn't just restart Apex. It briefly, unintentionally, opened up the logs of your illegal operation, which is why you were so desperate to shut down that line of inquiry. You didn't care about the bank, you cared about hiding the crime. Chen collapsed back into his seat, the energy draining out of him. The weight of the exposed truth was immediate and crushing. He didn't deny it again. Ethan looked at Rico, then back at the disgraced VP. The power of the lie had vanished, replaced by the profound silence of irreversible failure. The aftermath was swift and devastating. Within 48 hours, Michael Chen and 3 other senior executives were escorted out of Apex Global, not by security guards but by federal agents, their faces grim in the harsh lobby light. The systemic scandal, dubbed the Ghost Loop fraud by internal investigators, sent shockwaves through the financial world. Apex Global faced massive regulatory fines and an immediate, drastic dive in stock valuation. Ethan Hayes, despite the internal upheaval, stood at the epicenter, choosing integrity over concealment. He went public, announcing the internal fraud with a chilling clarity. He accepted ultimate responsibility for failing to monitor the structures he created, paying the highest price in the process. His impeccable reputation was tarnished, replaced by the grim moniker of the CEO, who let a conspiracy fester under his nose. He lost the implicit trust of the market and the unconditional loyalty of the board. The immediate consequence for Ethan was the slow, agonizing erosion of the empire he built. He was forced to initiate massive layoffs, dismantling entire departments that were tainted by the fraud, or were simply redundant after the financial hemorrhaging. The penthouse office now felt like a cage. He hadn't lost his freedom, but he had lost the belief that raw, absolute control was sustainable. The success he had sacrificed everything for tasted like ash. For Rico, the consequence was equally profound, though entirely different. He was officially cleared of any wrongdoing and provided with a sealed confidential bonus for whistleblowing, an amount equivalent to 2 years' salary. But the bank was no longer safe. The other employees, knowing he was the catalyst, eyed him with a mix of fear and resentment. The invisible man had become visible, and visibility brought danger. Rico didn't lose his job immediately, but he knew the environment was toxic. He had traded his quiet security for the terrifying noise of justice. The price of the truth was steep for everyone. Ethan saw his creation nearly destroyed by the very ambition that drove him, a painful mirror reflecting his own isolated pursuit of power. Rico realized that the world of immense power was fundamentally unstable, a truth Leo had glimpsed and documented. They were both left standing in the ruins of the status quo, one powerful, now humbled, the other humble, now exposed, bonded by the uncomfortable weight of the secret that had been forced into the light. 6 months later, the dust had settled into a new, quieter reality. Ethan Hayes stepped down as CEO of Apex Global. He didn't disappear into obscurity. Instead, he dedicated his considerable resources and expertise to regulatory compliance, creating open-source tools designed to detect the exact kind of internal fraud that had almost ruined him. He was building systems rooted in transparency, not control. The quiet desperation that had characterized his isolation had been replaced by a focused, less frantic purpose. He finally understood that value wasn't just in the balance sheet, but in the trust you held. Rico Perez, using the settlement money, was finally able to quit his grueling night shifts. He moved his family out of the cramped city apartment to a small, quiet house with a dedicated room for Leo. He didn't buy luxury. He bought time. Time to be present, time to protect his son's gift, and time to finally rest. Leo was enrolled in a specialized science academy, his brilliance no longer a secret burden, but a recognized potential. The final, unexpected bond between the two men occurred 2 months after Ethan's resignation. Ethan, working from a small nondescript office, was reviewing his new open-source project, a digital forensic tool called Honest Ledger. He found an incoming data patch that was clean, elegant, and instantly doubled the system's effectiveness. The associated user profile was simply LP. He tracked down the IP address, which led to a quiet suburban home. He drove out there, not as a CEO, but as a man seeking counsel. He found Rico working in the yard and Leo sitting on the porch, deeply absorbed in the complexities of the screen. Ethan didn't mention the code immediately. He simply observed the scene, the simple dignity of their new life, the quiet pride in Rico's posture, and the undeniable light of Leo's mind. Ethan approached Rico, shaking his hand not as a former employer, but as an equal who shared a dangerous secret. "Your son," Ethan said, the words heavy with respect, "is a rare kind of architect. He doesn't just fix systems, he sees their moral flaws." He offered Leo a high-level mentorship opportunity, not for profit, but for progress, a safe space to channel his unique vision. Rico watched the interaction, seeing not the ruthless titan, but a broken man finding redemption through his son's innocence. It was a new beginning, founded on a shared, profound understanding that the most powerful system in the world is the truth, delivered by the most unexpected hands. The quiet promise of dignity, once lost, had been fully restored. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to leave a comment with your thoughts on Ethan and Rico's transformation, and subscribe for more deep emotional tales like this one.